Well, it's been a minute, but here we go, finally getting back to the recordings. Racing Rules Seminar for Sailors, 6 week session, session 4. So, week 3 recap, slide 1. Part 217, in depth, and section C, 18, 19, and 20. 17, summarize, don't sail above the proper course when 17 is on. See the last two presentations for more details. 18.1a, mark room on when one boat is in the zone except if 1. Boats on opposite tacks on a beat to windward, but not downwind. Be careful. Number 2. One boat fetching and the other boat must tack to make the mark. Number 3. One boat approaching the mark and the other one is leaving the mark. Number 4. Continuing obstruction. In that case, 19 applies. And then 18.1b, no mark room when mark room has been given. Look at the definitions of mark room for more information. So 18.2, giving mark room when first boat reaches the zone, even if the overlap is broken or begun in the zone. 1, overlapped at the zone, the inside boat gets mark room. 2, not overlapped at the zone, first to the zone. That's a change from previous ways that this was worded, but the essence is the same if you look at some of the cases. 18.2b, 18.2a is off if mark room entitled boat tacks or leaves the zone. C, if 18.2a is off and overlap occurs, now the inside boat gets mark room again. D, inside overlap from clear astern or to windward doesn't always get mark room. 18.2a and C is off if the outside boat hasn't been able to give it from when the overlap began. And then E, if there's any reasonable doubt, it is presumed by the protest committee that the overlap was not broken or was not obtained in time. Then 18.3, tacking in the zone. 18.2 is turned off when a boat tacks in the zone from port to starboard and another boat is fetching the mark to be left to port. If the boat fetching since entering the zone tacking boat cannot cause her to go above close hauled when she tacks. So be careful if you're the port tack boat coming in and tacking either in front of or beside a starboard tack boat, especially if she's been fetching the mark ever since she entered the zone. 18.4, jibing in the zone. Right-of-way boat that needs to jibe in the zone cannot sail farther from the mark than needed. Doesn't apply at a gate mark. 19, room to pass an obstruction. A, the right-of-way boat chooses side to pass an obstruction and gives room to the other boat. B, overlapped outside boat gives room at obstruction unless unable to. C, at a continuing obstruction, clear astern boat required to keep clear that gets a boat, let's start over. 19C, at a continuing obstruction, clear astern boat required to keep clear that gets an overlap doesn't get room if that boat is not entitled to room under 19.2b and must keep clear while the two boats are overlapped since 10 and 11 don't apply. 20, room to tack and an obstruction. 21.1, hailing. Now a boat may hail room to tack if close hauled and or above and requires a substantial course change to avoid it unless it is a mark and a boat that is fetching it would be required to change course. So this is a change. You now have to use the words room to tack. And then 20.2, responding. The hail boat given some time to respond, usually not much, but shall respond even if it breaks 20.1, either by tacking or soon as possible or responding U-tack and avoid the hailing boat. After the hailed boat responds, hailing boat shall tack as soon as possible. When 20 applies, 18.2 does not. 20.3, passing on hail to an additional boat. Hailed boat intending to tack may hail another boat on the same tack for room to tack, even if conditions of 20.1 don't apply. 20.2 does apply. So once again, you must respond, but remember, protest if you think that it breaks the conditions of 20.1. 20.4, additional requirements for hails. Use a signal to clearly indicate the need for room to tack or response to a hail in windy conditions. The NOR, but not the SI, may specify and require alternative signals. So now, what are we going to talk about here in week 4, part 3, conduct of a race, and part 5, protest and redress request in Appendix A. Basically, what should the event organizing authority be doing, and what should the race committee be doing? Well, the race committee, we know, should prepare the SI, conduct the race, and score the race. While the event organizing authority, we'll talk more later and next week, should be writing the NOR, getting the race committee together, as well as making sure that they have judges, or making sure the race committee, if they're going to appoint the judges. And there's all sorts of conditions around that we'll discuss later. How to properly protest another boat. That's an important skill to learn and know and be prepared for in case you see somebody breaking the rules and they're fouling you or fouling another boat. When and how to request redress. You can't protest the race committee, the technical committee, or the protest committee. However, you can request redress. So let's look at a summary of the titles in part 3. Well, 25 is all about the NOR, the SI, and the signals. 26, starting races, 5 minutes signals. 26, starting races, 5 minutes signal sequence. 27, other race committee actions before the starting signals. 28, sailing the course. 29, recalls, individual and general. 30, starting penalties, I, Z, U, and black flags. Summary of titles continued. 31, touching a mark. Basically, don't. 32, shortening or abandoning after the start. 33, changing the next leg of the course. 34, mark missing. 35, race time limit. 36, races restarted or resailed. 37, search and rescue instruction. So one of the things that the race committee and the event organizing authority should do or shall do is the notice of race shall be made available to each boat that enters an event before she enters. The sailing instructions shall be made available to each boat before a race begins. So without an NOR, technically by the racing rules of sailing, one cannot enter a race. And the SI needs to be present before the first race, or else there aren't any actual racing rules that the SI is required to provide, and they are not available to the boats, so it's going to be difficult for them to know what exactly they're supposed to be doing. Now, 25.2, the meanings of the visual and sound signals stated in the race signals shall not be changed except under Rule 86.1b. The meanings of any other signals that may be used shall be stated in the notice of race or sailing instructions. So the race signals can actually be changed under 86.1b, but must be done properly in either the NOR or the SI. And since this is about what's happening on the race course, it's recommended that those changes are in the SI. It also describes any additional signals, and again, these can be both in the NOR or the SI, but the sailors should be looking at their SIs for what's happening on the race course, so make sure that your signals or signal changes are in the SIs. And then 25.3, when the race committee is required to display a flag as a visual signal, it may use a flag or other object of similar appearance. So there are times when flags get lost, and if you have a white piece of paper or a board and some paint, whatever the case may be, as long as you can make a representation of what the flag signal would be, then that can be used as the visual signal. So race visual signals may be a flag or a similar representation. Starting races. The races shall be started by using the following signals. Time shall be taken from the visual signals. The absence of a sound signal shall be disregarded. So it is not considered an error of the race committee, not good form, but it is not an error if the race committee fails to make the sound. As long as the visual signals are being raised at the appropriate times, then the race committee is conducting the race properly. So the race signals are visual signals such as flags, and sounds, typically horns, although they can be whistles or other sounds. And then a flag is required. The sounds are required, but the absence is not an error in the starting sequence. So the race committee, again, could raise the flag, not do the horn, forget to push the horn button, and continue on. They don't have to AP the race at that point. So then we have a 5-minute sequence, which is the typical sequence for especially keel boats. Other times could be specified in the notice of race or the sailing instructions. Typically, it might be a 3-minute sequence for dinghies, but then you may be using Appendix U instead of 26. So at 5 minutes to go before the starting signal, you're going to have the visual signal, which is your class flag, which has been designated either in the sailing instructions or on your notice board or on the back of your race committee vessel. And you're going to make one sound, and that means the warning signal. So then you have at 4 minutes is called your preparatory signal. And the preparatory signal, you could have a P flag, which is a no penalty flag, just simple OCS, or you could have an I flag, which is around the ends, flag as we call it, the Z flag, which is rarely used, which is a scoring penalty. You could have a Z with I, which would be a scoring penalty, plus around the ends to clear yourself. And then you can have a U flag or a black flag. Now we've talked about all these signals earlier, and so I won't continue on with those at the moment, although we may review it later. Then finally, at 1 minute before the start signal, the preparatory flag is removed with one long signal. And that's 1 minute before the starting signal. And then the class flag is removed at 0 minutes before the starting signal. And of course, you've got one sound signal that occurs, and that is your starting signal. Remember, your starting signal is going to be your demarcation line, if you will, for when Rule 17 is now on, if it applies, and other things like that. The warning signal for each succeeding class shall be made with or after the starting signal of the preceding class. So the race committee could decide to roll the starts, which means as the class flag is removed for one class that is starting, you could then start another sequence immediately at the same time by raising the next class flag. Other times, typically between the classes, a lot of times race committees will wait 1 or 2 minutes in order to make sure that the starting line is clear. It's up to the level of racing, the number of boats, the sea conditions, and things like that. And so we've reviewed the standard 5-minute start sequence. The class flag is designated in the NOR and SI. The penalty flag at prep signal, racing rule 30, and the racing at prep signal, and that's by the definition. And we've talked about the choice of rolling starts or delayed starts to clear the starting line, and that's again up to the race committee to decide, and they usually will communicate that to the sailors. Now, Rule 27, other race committee actions before the starting signal. No later than the warning signal, the race committee shall signal or otherwise designate the course to be sailed if the sailing instructions have not stated the course, and it may replace one course signal with another and signal that wearing personal flotation devices is required. In this case, they would display flag Y with one sound. So just to emphasize, if not stated in the SI, before the warning signal, the RC signals or designates the course and may signal PFDs required. 27.2, no later than the preparatory signal, the race committee may move a starting mark. So in other words, the race committee is obligated not to move the starting marks after the prep signal. And that becomes important, of course, because a lot of times, especially in big boats, when they're pinging the ends of the line so they can determine if they're over or not and things like that. And so therefore, the race committee cannot move a starting mark after the preparatory signal because we're in racing mode. 27.3, before starting signal, the race committee may for any reason postpone by displaying flag AP, AP over H, or AP over A with 2 sounds, or abandon the race, display flag N over H, or N over A with 3 sounds. So before the starting signal, the RC may either postpone or abandon the race. Now, some people ask the question, well, why would the race committee abandon the race rather than simply postpone it? And the one answer that I can come up with is that they may decide that there's weather coming in and it's in their best interest to abandon the race and therefore send everybody in. That would be the most likely reason for abandoning the race. There could be other instances, such as you have several flights that are on the course and you see that the wind is dying and it doesn't make sense to continue the racing that's going on, so then again they could abandon the race. So as we said, 27.3, here are all the different flag sequences that could be used. Postponement signals, a simple AP flag, which often is called cat in the hat, goes up with 2 sounds, down with 1 sound. And 1 minute after its removal, the warning signal for the race should be made unless you're postponing or abandoning again. AP over H, race is not started or postponed, further signals ashore, so you just need the 2 horns for it to go up, and then you'll see what happens when you get on shore. And then if you're done for the day because you see the weather or the conditions are such that you're not going to be racing any longer, you can postpone the race with AP over A, and there's no more racing today for that race. Abandonment signals, similar as well, except now we have an N flag. It goes up with 3 horns and down with 1. So if you abandon the race for some reason before the start signal, and then you want to continue resail that race, then you're going to bring that flag down with 1 horn, and then 1 minute later, you're going to start the next sequence with a warning signal unless for some reason you abandon or postpone the race again. And then similarly, the N over H, all races in progress are abandoned, further signals ashore. And N over A, all races in progress are abandoned, no more racing today. Sailing the course, Rule 28. So this has been rewritten and made much shorter than it was before because the sail the course definition was changed and now incorporates a lot of what was already in Rule 28. So Rule 28 says sailing the course. 28.1, a boat shall sail the course. 28.2, a boat may correct any errors in sailing the course provided she has not finished. And then the definition, sail the course. A boat sails the course when A, she starts, B, a string representing her track until she finishes, when drawn taut, 1, passes each mark of the course for the race on the required side and in the correct order, including the starting marks. Touches each mark designated in the sailing instructions to be a rounding mark and passes between the marks of a gate from the direction of the course from the previous mark, and then C, she finishes. A mark that does not begin, bound, or in the leg the boat is sailing does not have a required side, therefore the boat doesn't have to worry about that mark. So the bottom line is sail the course correctly to satisfy the string rule. Correct errors by unwinding the string. Sailing the course, rewritten since sail the course definition was rewritten. The RC must designate rounding marks or unintended consequences may occur. And if the RC does not designate the rounding marks, then interpretation by the sailors is going to be a little creative, shall we say. Now remember that the finish direction can be changed if designated in the SIs, and this is in the definition. So therefore, before you could only finish by finishing from the direction of the last mark. However, if the SIs say some other arrangement for finishing, then you may have to finish from the other direction. If not on the leg being sailed, marks don't have a required side. So think about a situation where you have a leeward gate in front of the committee boat and you're on the second run down of a 2 times around windward leeward, and so on the second time down the gate is not a mark of the course and you're just simply sailing for the finish. So why the race committee must specify rounding marks? J2.14, it's actually a rule requirement for the sailing instructions. A real life scenario happened. in a course stated as start, A to port, B to starboard, finish at the start line. Though not a good course, this is what the race committee meant, or at least that's the way they wrote it on the board. However, when the RC specified without A and B marks being specified as rounding marks, this is in fact what the boat could do because they followed the rules. They left A to port, they rounded B to starboard, and then went back to finish. So in this case, another situation, when we talk about the string rule and we want to understand what this whole unwinding thing means. Course stated as all marks other than start-finish marks are rounding marks. Start-finish line is obstruction. So the course is start, W to port, R to port, L to port, finish at the start-finish line. And just for reference, W, of course, means windward mark, R means reaching mark, and L means leeward mark. So let's say that a boat sails the blue line. So the blue line is an incorrect course because they did not sail around R to port as they were required. They just passed R to starboard. So next we look at the red line. The red line is what happens if they don't unwind their string properly. And so they say, oops, I forgot to do R, so I'm going to go sail up and I'm going to do R, and then I'm going to come back and go around L again, and then I'm going to finish. However, that doesn't unwind the line or the string, and when you pull it tight, it's not going to go around the correct marks in the correct order. So if the boat skips R and goes up to L to finish, in order to correct her error, the boat has to unwind the string, then sail the course correctly. Why? The string must pass each mark on the required side in the correct order. So here's what they should have done. If we go back one, here's the blue line that they did. So now if we follow the green line, here's where they turn around, they come back around L and outside the start-finish line. Then they go around R properly, back around L, and then they finish. And so what you should try to imagine, here's this loose piece of the string, the green and the blue here, and if I pull on the blue here and the green, now this is going to pull the green and blue tight across, just as if they had sailed the proper course. But if they don't unwind the string, then they are not going to be sailing the course properly and would be disqualified by Rule 28. So now let's move on to Rule 29, recalls. So if you're over the line at the start, then you're going to see an individual recall if they can identify your boat. So when at the boat starting signal, any part of her hull is on the course side of the starting line, or she must comply with Rule 30.1, the race committee shall promptly display flag X with one sound. The flag shall be displayed until the hull of each such boat has been completely on the pre-start side of the starting line or one of its extensions, and until all such boats have complied with Rule 30.1 if it applies, but no later than 4 minutes after the starting signal or 1 minute before any later starting signal, whichever is earlier. So think about, it's going to be 4 minutes if you're talking about 5-minute sequences, and it's going to be probably 3 minutes if you're talking about 3-minute sequences. If Rule 29.2, 30.3, or 30.4 applies, this rule does not. So we have our pictures of our flags. The X or X-ray flag goes up with one sound. Now on the other hand, we'll talk about the general recall, that's the first substitute flag, goes up with 2 horns and then comes down with 1 horn. So the X flag plus 1 required sound displayed within 2 to 3 seconds equals an individual recall. So race committees need to understand that as soon as they see that a boat is over the line early and they're needing to call OCS, then the X flag plus the sound has to be displayed, and it should be, if it's done properly, within 2 to 3 seconds after the starting signal. If you do it later than that and boats are too far away to hear or see the signals, you're not being fair to them. And then if it's used with a P or I starting penalties. So if you have a P flag or an I flag, then you're going to use the X flag. The X flag remains up until all boats on the pre-start side or comply with 30.1, which is the I flag going around the ends, and then if not, up for 4 minutes after the start signal or until 1 minute before the next warning. You do not lower the flag when a boat clears the line until all boats have cleared the line. So now the general recall. The general recall, when at the starting signal, the race committee is unable to identify boats that are on the course side of the starting line or to which Rule 30 applies, or there has been an error in the starting procedure, the race committee may signal a general recall, display the first substitute with 2 sounds. The warning signal for a new start for the recalled class shall be made 1 minute after the first substitute is removed, 1 sound, and the starts for any succeeding classes shall follow the new start. So in this case, unless the SIs make a different arrangement, the class that had the general recall will need to be the class that starts next. So the first substitute is the flag plus 2 sounds equals general recall. Where you have too many OCS boats to ID or the RC has a starting procedure error primarily. The next warning is 1 minute after the general recall is removed with 1 sound. So preparatory flags, P or Papa flag. RC often starts with a P or Papa flag, which means basic OCS penalty is in effect, and you can dip below the start line and restart. You're not required to go along the ends. So remember that the P flag goes up with 1 horn and down with 1 long sound. And so note long dash equals preparatory flags come down with 1 long sound. Now we have starting penalties, 30.1, the I flag rule, aka, or also known as, around the ends rule. If flag I has been displayed and any part of a boat's hull is on the course side of the starting line or one of its extensions during the last minute before her starting signal, she shall sail across an extension so that her hull is completely on the start side before she starts. So let's say a boat is over early, within the 1 minute between the prep flag coming down and the starting signal, and as let's just say she's up here somewhere, she's got to go all the way around the end of the line through the extension, and she could go either this way or she could go this way. Now let's say a boat is up here or outside of the starting mark, but they're still above the extension of the line. Well, the same thing applies. In order for them to start properly, they have to sail down on the outside of the starting line and then restart. So that's Rule 30.1, the I flag, the black dot with the yellow background. So the Z flag rule, if the flag Z has been displayed, no part of a boat's hull shall be in the triangle formed by the ends of the starting line and the first mark during the last minute before her signal. If a boat breaks this rule and is identified, she shall receive, without a hearing, a 20% scoring penalty calculated as stated in Rule 44.3c. She shall be penalized even if the race is restarted or resailed, but not if it is postponed or abandoned before the starting signal. If she is similarly identified during a subsequent attempt to start the same race, she shall receive an additional 20% scoring penalty. So even if the race is restarted or resailed after, and because it was abandoned or general recalled after the starting signal, then she's going to keep her 20% penalty, but not penalized if it's postponed or abandoned before the starting signal. So what do we mean about being in the triangle? Well, just this, the end of the start line, end of the start line, and then the first mark of the course. Okay, this forms the triangle that if you're in anywhere in the triangle within 1 minute, you're going to get the 20% penalty. And the Z flag is a very colorful flag with all these different colors, And so if you see this, that's going to be the Z flag. Same thing with all the other prep flags, goes up with one horn and down with one dash. Then we have the U flag rule. If flag U has been displayed, no part of a boat's hull shall be in the triangle formed by the ends of the starting line and the first mark during the last minute before her starting signal. If a boat breaks this rule and is identified, she shall be disqualified without a hearing, but not if it's restarted or resailed. And so, again, just a reminder what this means. If you're over the line inside this triangle, now if you're over here, then you're not considered to be violating the U flag rule, but in order to start, you're still going to have to come down and start like this. Because if you go inside the triangle after the starting signal, then I would imagine, and then dip and then come up, I imagine that a race committee would possibly consider you UFD. So be careful about that. This is the U flag. A lot of people don't know yet what this looks like, but note that they get red squares and the white squares, checkerboard pattern. Same thing. A prep flag goes up with one horn, down with one long sound. And then the black flag rule, you're scored BFD if you're in the triangle. She shall be disqualified without a hearing even if the race is restarted or resailed, but not if it is postponed or abandoned before the starting signal. So the race committee does have the option, if they see that things are just not going right, they should postpone the race before the starting signal, and that way then boats could actually sail the next race. If a general recall is signaled or a race is abandoned after the starting signal, the race committee shall display her sail number before the next warning signal for that race, and if the race is restarted or resailed, she shall not sail in it. If she does so, her disqualification shall not be excluded in calculating her series score. And so we don't want a D&E, and that's not a good thing. BFD is bad enough, but don't compound the error by getting a D&E because you sailed in a race where your sail number was displayed before the next warning signal. So that's why it's important as a sailor, if you're sailing under a BFD or a black flag rule, then you need to go by the committee boat if there was a postponement or abandonment. I'm sorry, if the race was general recall signaled or abandoned after the starting signal. Because if your number is up there and then they see that you sailed that race, they will then award you a D&E without a hearing. So again, just our summary of flags, the various prep flags used by the race committee. RC often starts with a P or Papa flag, which means basic OCS penalty. You can dip your hull completely below the start line and restart, and you're going to see a individual recall flag in that case. I flag means you go around the ends of the start line if you're OCS to restart, and that's Racing Rule 30.1. And then your Z flag, rarely used, adds a scoring penalty if you're inside the triangle within 1 minute of the start. That's Racing Rule 30.2. Your U flag, we could consider a black flag light, DSQ if inside the triangle, but can restart if the race is resailed, Racing Rule 30.3. Black flag is DSQ if inside the triangle, and cannot restart if the race is general recalled or abandoned after the starting signal and resailed. Look at your name for your name on the RC board. If your name is not on the RC board, and I should say sail number usually, then you and later they score you either D&E or BFD. Especially if they score you D&E, then you should file for redress, because if your number was not on the board, then that means the race committee made an error. So 32, shortening or abandoning after the start. After the starting signal, the race committee may shorten the course or abandon the race because of foul weather, because of insufficient wind, making it unlikely any boat will sail the course within the time limit because the mark is missing or out of position, or for any other reason directly affecting the safety or fairness of the competition. In addition, the race committee may shorten the course so that other scheduled races can be sailed, or abandon the race because of an error in the starting procedure. However, after one boat has sailed the course within the race time limit, if any. The race committee shall not abandon the race without considering the consequences for all boats in the race series. So, again, just to reiterate, the race committee may shorten the course or abandon the race due to foul weather, no wind, time limit, mark missing, out of position, any other reason impacting race safety or fairness. They may shorten to get more races in and abandon if the starting procedure error if realized too late for a general recall. So sometimes they'll decide to do an abandonment rather than a general recall because they belatedly figure out their error, and then they just abandon that race because it was the race committee's error, not really the competitor's error. And if one boat has sailed the course within the time limit, the RC must carefully consider the consequences of abandoning for all boats in the race or series. Real life example that came up here recently was where a race committee made the decision to use a very tiny offset mark. 6 boats did not even see the offset mark, and so they simply rounded the weather mark but not the offset mark. And then finally, a competitor about 7th or 8th in line saw that there was an offset mark, rounded the offset mark, and then protested the other sailors for not sailing the course. The race committee decided that they had set up an unfair course by not putting a big enough mark up for the sailors to see that there was an offset mark. And so even though they had finished boats, they decided to abandon the entire race because they didn't think it was fair to the sailors. All right, so let's talk about shortening the course. So the rule is to shorten the course, the race committee shall display flag S with 2 sounds before the first boat crosses the finishing line. If the course is shortened, the finishing line shall be A, at a rounding mark between the mark and a staff displaying flag S, B, a line the course requires 2 boats to cross, or at a gate between the gate marks. So shortening the course means a finish line is being set up with an S flag at a rounding mark, a line boats are required to cross between the marks of a gate. The S flag is raised with 2 sounds. So that means that the course has been shortened. So it's kind of like the opposite of the Papa flag, where you have the small blue square inside of a white field. Now let's take a look at some proper ways to set up our shortening of a course, because we don't want to confuse our sailors. So here are the recommended spots for placing your S flags. 3 places that the race can be shortened at with the recommended S flag placement shown. A rounding mark. So sailors would be coming upwind. They would expect to round the mark to port. Therefore, the best place to put your S flag is over here to the right of the mark so that they can finish correctly by finishing in the direction from the last mark, which is the definition of finish unless changed in the SIs. If you were to put this flag over on the other side, many sailors would at first not realize that you were over here. They would round the mark, then they would see the S flag, and then they would attempt to come between the windward mark and the S flag, and that by the definition of finish would be incorrect, again, unless it was changed in the SIs. Same thing here, you wouldn't want to put the S flag on the other side of the reaching mark because, again, the sailors are expecting it rounded to port, so put the S flag over here to the left as we're looking upwind of the reaching mark, and then your sailors are going to properly finish and not be confused. Same thing with your leeward mark, set your S flag on this side, so they can finish between the S flag and the leeward mark. And then finally, if you were having them come through a gate or a start-finish line that is designated as part of the course, then you could have the S flag, which needs to be right up next against this gate mark, because you don't want them attempting to go between you and the gate mark. Rather, you want them going through the gate, and the S flag almost should be sitting right on top of that mark if that was possible. So that's the best way to put the S flag. Again, the idea is to put the S flag on the side of a mark or gate that the sailors would expect to round or pass from the last mark. The less you confuse the sailors, the best. While at a gate, it could be either end, but make sure there's no room between your boat holding the S flag and the gate mark so they don't try to go between you and the mark. So to abandon a race in progress, Rule 32.3, the race committee shall display flag N over H, or N over A with 3 sounds. And reasons to abandon after the start: foul weather, no wind or time limit, mark missing out of position, any other reason impacting the race safety or fairness, a starting procedure error if realized too late for a general recall. And once again, just a reminder of what our flags look like. We have our checkerboard flag for the N flag, 3 horns up, 1 horn down. And then, of course, if you're abandoning and further signals ashore, it's N over H. And if you're N over A, then all races in progress are abandoned and no more racing today. So changing the next leg of the course, Rule 33. So this adds a lot of extra work for the race committee, and so frankly a lot of race committees will write or change this rule in the SIs so that they are allowed to make minor changes in the marks, especially the windward mark or even the leeward gate, without having to signal a Charlie flag with repetitive sounds and either the new compass bearing or the green triangle and or red rectangle for a change to port. So let's read through the rule real quick. While boats are racing, the race committee may change a leg of the course that begins at a rounding mark or at a gate by changing the position of the next mark or the finishing line and signaling all boats before they begin the leg. The next mark need not be in position at that time, although I will say it's a good idea for the mark or mark boat with the mark visible to the competitors to be roughly in the position as much as possible. A, if the direction of the leg will be changed, the signal shall be the display of flag C or Charlie with repetitive sounds and one or both of 1, the new compass bearing, 2, a green triangle for a change to starboard, or a red rectangle for a change to port. So for your colorblind sailors, they'll be looking for a triangle or a rectangle instead of green and red. B, if the length of the leg will be changed, the signal shall be display of the flag C with repetitive sounds and a minus sign if the length will be decreased, or a plus sign if it will be increased. A lot of times you see race committees use some form of a board to display the minus sign or the plus sign, or also with the compass bearing, they may have a board as well that they write the course bearing on. And C, subsequent legs may be changed without further signaling to maintain the course shape. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the wind shifts happen. If the RC wants to change a mark to a new position, they signal at the beginning of the leg before any boats begin the leg. And note that any special procedures can be stated in the SI under J2.217, which means that they could possibly change it to where instead of using this procedure in 33, they specify a different procedure, but only if they've done it properly through 86.1, where they've stated what the change is and what the rule is that's being changed. Assuming they haven't changed it, if you're changing direction, Charlie flag, C with repetitive sounds with 1 or both, a compass bearing and or a direction colored shape, starboard green triangle, port red rectangle. So while you can do both, remember you don't have to do both the compass bearing and the direction colored shape. You can do one or the other. And then if you're changing the length, the Charlie flag with repetitive sounds with the length signal, plus means longer and minus equals shorter. And just a reminder, this is what the Charlie flag looks like. And again, you have the multiple dashes below the Charlie flag indicating repetitive signals. A lot of times people will use a special electronic whistle that has the mode where it'll do repetitive whistles without having to continually hit the button. And then here's your green triangle and your red rectangle, starboard and port, and then minus sign for decreasing the length of the leg and plus sign for increasing the length of the leg. If you get a mark missing or out of position while boats are racing, the race committee shall, if possible, move it to its correct position or replace it with a new one of a similar appearance, or replace it with an object displaying flag M and make repetitive sounds. So this is what the mic flag looks like, or the M flag. The object displaying this signal replaces a missing mark. So the RC boat with M flag and repetitive sounds is now the weather mark. We got a drifting weather mark situation, and we know that marks drift, lose anchors, etc. If you can't move the mark back quickly, the RC boat with an M flag and the repetitive signals now becomes the new mark. Race time limit and scores. If one boat sails the course within the time limit for that race, if any, all boats that finish shall be scored according to their finishing places unless the race is abandoned. If no boat sails the course within the race time limit, the race committee shall abandon the race. So oftentimes you'll see in the SIs that a race time limit has been specified. It may be 1 hour, maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, doesn't matter. The race committee does the calculations and determines what those race time limits shall be. And so if one boat does sail the course within that time limit, then all the boats that finish shall be scored according to their finishing places unless the race is abandoned. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is that you can specify a finishing window, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So this just emphasizes that all boats will have to be scored. If no boat sails the course, the race committee shall abandon the race if a race time limit has been specified. So, as I was saying about finishing windows, okay, so the OA or RC can specify in the SI the time limits which either force the race committee to abandon a race if they are exceeded, or the score received by boats finishing after the time limit for other boats to finish. So a race time limit for the first boat to sail the course, which is specified in J2.16. RC is to consider shortening the race as opposed to abandoning the race to help keep the race score happening. B, time limit to finish to the first mark is another possible time limit that can be specified. If no boat gets to the first mark in, say, 45 minutes, then the race shall be abandoned. And then the finishing window, time for the boats to finish after the first or second boat finishes, J2.2.18. The purpose of time limits is to expedite the racing schedule and to provide guidance to the race committee in case of low wind situations, especially where you have current and people start going backwards and they're never going to finish the race. Then it probably makes sense for you to abandon that race. A race is restarted or resailed. So if a race is restarted or resailed, it could be an abandoned race, a general recalled race, etc. A breach of a rule in the original race or any previous restart or resale of that race shall not prohibit a boat from competing unless she has broken Rule 30.4. Remember that that's going to be your black flag rule. Or cause a boat to be penalized except under Rule 2, 30.2, 30.4, or 69, or under Rule 14 when she has caused injury or serious damage. So if a race is postponed, abandoned, or has a general recall, then a boat will not be penalized for breaking a rule except under Rule 2, Fair Play and Sportsmanship, 30.2, Z flag scoring penalty, 30.4 black flag, 69 misconduct, or 14 avoiding contact if a boat caused injury or serious damage. Also, the only rule that a boat can break and not be allowed to compete in the resailed race is 30.4, which is your black flag rule. Search and rescue instructions. When RC displays the V flag, which is the red X on a white background, all boats, race vessels, and support vessels essentially become search and rescue boats and are obligated to monitor the RC channel and render aid under Racing Rule 1.1. So just to read the rule, when the race committee displays the flag V with one sound, all boats and official support vessels shall, if possible, monitor the race committee communication channel for search and rescue instructions. So we always hope that that flag never has to be displayed, but if it is, you definitely need to know what it is and what you need to be doing. Okay, so now let's move on to Part 5, Protest, Redress Hearings, Misconduct and Appeals. 60.1, a right to protest, has been simplified considerably. Now a boat or a committee may protest a boat. If you remember, the committee definition was changed, and now protest committee, technical committee, and race committee are all combined in the word committee. For a boat to protest a boat, a valid protest shall, at the first reasonable opportunity, consist of A. Hail the word protest. That's a required hail, typically immediately, no more than 5 seconds after the incident has occurred. If you don't say the word protest within 5 to 10 seconds after the incident, then your protest oftentimes will be determined invalid unless there's other mitigating circumstances. B, display a red flag, usually within 15 seconds, unless there are mitigating circumstances or your boat doesn't require it because it's too short. And then deliver a written protest that identifies the protester, protestee, and the incident. And I interpret the incident as describing the occurrence or the event which caused you to protest the other boat for breaking the rule. What changed? Not exactly a lot, but 60.2, 60.3, and 60.4 explicitly state what makes a protest valid versus a less clear version in the 2021-2024 rules. Now, just to let you know that there's some U.S. appeals that apply, displaying the red flag and hailing of the word protest. When you look at what guidance that the judges have for what the length of time, U.S. Appeals 66, 67, 82, 122, and 124 all need to be looked at. Also, when we're talking about the incident, U.S. Appeals 90 and U.S. Question 125 help with some of the clarification there. And understand why now that the protestee has to be stated correctly, because the protest committee is responsible for notifying everyone that there's a hearing to be held so that they're properly notified. If you write down the wrong sail number and the wrong boat is notified, then the hearing has got to be declared invalid because the wrong boat came to the hearing, and a boat can't be penalized unless they're a party to the hearing. So it's very important that you get the protestee sail number correct or some other identifying information, their name, etc. We had an incident where the protestee or protestor wrote down the wrong sail number. And as soon as they saw the person show up in the room, they went, "Oh, that's not who I meant." Well, by then the protest time limit had already gone past and it was too late for them to refile the protest. So make sure that you get the correct sail number when you're filing the protest. Intention to protest. So if a protest concerns an incident observed by the protester in the racing area, 1, if the protester is a boat, she shall hail protest, as I said earlier in the summary, and if her hull length is longer than 6 meters, conspicuously display a red flag at the first reasonable opportunity for each. She shall display the flag until she is no longer racing. So remember, if you're now the rule says longer than 6 meters rather than less than 6 meters. Doesn't matter that much anymore. But you must have a red flag. You must display it at the first reasonable opportunity, which is now pretty much within about 15 seconds after hailing protest, and you should tie the flag to your backstay and display it for the remainder of your racing until you've crossed the finish line. If the protester is a committee, it shall inform the boat after the race within the protest time limit of its intention to protest her. However, if the protestee is not within hailing distance at the time of the incident, or the incident was an error in sailing the course, or the incident was not observed by the protester in the racing area, or a protest committee decides to protest a boat under Rule 60.4C, then the only requirement for the protester is to inform the the protestee of its intention to protest at the first reasonable opportunity. If at the time of the incident it is obvious to a protesting boat that a member of either crew is in danger, say in the water, or injured or serious damage has resulted, Rules 60.2a and 60.2b do not apply to her, but she shall attempt to inform the other boat within the protest time limit of her intention to protest. A committee may inform a boat of its intention to protest by posting a notice on the official notice board. So that's why it's important that you look at the official notice board, either online or at the club, until it's clear that you have not been protested, because if a committee decides to protest you, that's the only notice they're required to give you. And so, I want to provide you with this information to say there are some exceptions about the protest procedure, and you need to understand what these exceptions are. And then again, a committee may inform a boat of its intention to protest by posting a notice on the official notice board. And if there's any obvious danger, injury, or serious damage, then the protesting boat is given a little more leeway in terms of notifying, but shall attempt to inform the other boat within the protest time limit of her intention to protest. So now let's say delivering a protest. When delivered, a protest shall be in writing and identify the protester, the protestee, and the incident, as we indicated earlier. Now, obviously, in writing, it could be on a napkin, it could be on an official U.S. sailing or other world sailing hearing request form, or of course, it can be electronic with new systems that allow electronic protests to be filed. Those types of things will be specified in your NOR or SI most likely. B, a protest shall be delivered to the race office or by such other method as stated in the sailing instructions within the protest time limit, unless the protest committee decides there's a good reason to extend the time. The protest time limit is for protest about an incident observed in the racing area 2 hours after the last boat in the race finishes, or for other protests 2 hours after the relevant information is available to the protester. However, if the sailing instructions state a different protest time limit, then that time limit is going to apply instead. All right, so a reminder what the definition of the word protest is: an allegation made under Rule 60 by a boat or a committee that a boat has broken a rule. Seems pretty obvious. But a protest validity: a protest is invalid if it does not comply with the definition of protest, see above, or Rule 60.2 or 60.3. So let's go back. 60.3 says how you're delivering the protest, primarily in writing, identifying the protester, protestee, and the incident, and within the time limit. And then 60.2, you have followed the rules for informing the boat of your intention to protest. So that's what 60.2 and 60.3 are. And the reason that they use the word protest, an allegation under Rule 60, that a boat has broken a rule, because there are reasons that if you're not alleging that a rule has been broken, then you can't protest. If it is from a boat that alleges a breach of rule of Part 2 or 31, but she was not involved in it or did not see the incident, the protest is invalid, and therefore the protest committee will close the hearing. And then as far as it alleges a breach of Rule 69 or a regulation referred to in Rule 6, unless permitted by the regulation concerned. So that's going to be an invalid protest as well. Now, however, you can make a report to the protest committee of a Rule 69 violation, and the protest committee will consider that report and decide whether it wants to open up a Rule 69 hearing or not. A protest is invalid also if it is from a committee and is based on information from a request for redress. So if you find out during a request for redress that a rule was broken by a boat, then you cannot then turn around and file a protest. And it cannot be from an invalid protest. So sometimes people give information in a protest that's considered invalid, and the committee cannot turn around and file a protest based on that information. And 3, a report from a person with a conflict of interest other than a representative of the boat herself. So let's say a coach or somebody says, oh, I saw so-and-so break this rule. Well, that does not constitute a valid protest. Again, they can report them for a Rule 69 violation, something like that. However, they cannot protest a boat themselves. The representative of the boat in the racing area would need to file that protest. However, the above rule 60.4b does not apply to a protest from the protest committee if it learns of an incident involving a boat that may have resulted in injury or serious damage. 2, the protest committee if it learns during the hearing of a valid protest that the boat, although not a party to the hearing, was involved in the incident and may have broken a rule, in which case the protest committee must stop the hearing, protest the new party, inform them by posting it on the notice board, and then start the hearing all over again. And then we have 60.3c, the technical committee, if it has first conducted an inspection and decided a boat or a personal equipment does not comply with the class rules or Rule 50. So that's another situation where 60.4b does not apply, but 60.4c3 will allow the technical committee to still protest a boat if it has conducted an inspection and decided that the boat has broken a rule. Now let's get to redress. So first of all, 61 is the new number for redress. 60.1 is requesting or considering redress. A boat may request redress. Flat, simple, to the point. B, the race committee or the technical committee may request redress for a boat. C, the protest committee may call a hearing to consider redress for a boat. In the old rules, U.S. Sailing had prescribed that the race committee shall request redress for a boat, but they've changed it back to the protest committee may call a hearing to consider redress for a boat. And it may be based on a boat's request for redress or the race committee or technical committee or some other observations that the protest committee has made. 61.2, request for redress. A request for redress shall be in writing, identify the reason for making it. A request shall be delivered to the race office or by such other means as stated in the sailing instructions. 1, if it is based on an incident in the racing area within the protest time limit, or 2 hours after the incident, whichever is later. So let's say it was something that occurred later that somebody found out about that was not involved with the racing, and then they could ask for redress 2 hours after the incident actually occurs. Now, 61.22, if it is based on the protest committee decision on the last scheduled day of racing or no later than 30 minutes after the decision was posted, or for all other requests as soon as reasonably possible after the relevant information is available. So sometimes the information doesn't become available, such as scoring, doesn't come until later than 30 minutes after a decision or after the last scheduled day of racing. And so if you have a good reason to extend the time limit, then the protest committee should do so. 61.3, invalid request. A request for redress is invalid if it does not comply with 61.2. And so again, 61.2 is shall be in writing and identify the reason, delivered in time, and these other two caveats 2 and 3 tell you that on the last day of racing you're going to have to get it in sooner, but you got to comply with 61.2 for it to be a valid protest. So now request decisions. The protest committee shall conduct a hearing as required by Rule 63 to decide whether to grant redress. A boat is entitled to redress if her score or place in a race or series has been made or may be made significantly worse through no fault of her own by 1, an improper action or improper omission of a committee or the organizing authority, but not by a protest committee decision when the boat was a party to the hearing. And then 2, injury or physical damage because of the action of a boat that was breaking a rule of Part 2 and took an appropriate penalty or was penalized. So just because a boat broke Part 2 rule and caused you to miss or lose some places, unless there was injury or physical damage to your boat, you cannot be granted redress. 3. Injury or physical damage because the action of a vessel not racing that was required to keep clear or is determined to be at fault under the RRS or a government right-of-way rule. 4. Giving help except to herself or her crew in compliance with Rule 1.1. Or 5. An action of another boat or a crew member or support person of that boat that resulted in a penalty under Rule 2. Note that's Rule 2, not Part 2, or a penalty or warning under Rule 69. So, in other words, there are valid reasons to file for redress. Your place in a race or series is made significantly worse, that's the first hurdle, through no fault of her own, that's the second hurdle, by 1. An improper action or omission of a committee or OA. Typically, it's going to be considered an improper action or omission if the race committee breaks a rule. If they don't break a rule, then it's going to be difficult to get redress. 2. Injury or physical damage caused by a boat breaking Part 2 rule and penalized. 3. A vessel not racing breaking a rule. 4. Giving help to another boat. If you go over to assist another boat with a crew in the water, then you can get redress. 5. An action of another boat, crew, or support person that resulted in penalty under Rule 2 or 69. So those are the conditions under which you may be granted redress. A lot of times people want to file redress for things like, oh, I couldn't have possibly been OCS. Well, that's a scoring review for you to take up with the race committee. But typically, if you file for redress, which you are entitled to do, the protest committee more likely is going to side with the race committee because it's through their observations and records that is going to determine whether or not you're OCS, UFD, or BFD. We look at support persons, Rule 62. 62.1, upon receipt of a report from a boat or a committee, or based on its own observation or information from any source, including evidence taken during a hearing, the protest committee may call a hearing to consider whether a support person has broken a rule. If the protest committee decides to call a hearing, it shall conduct a hearing as required by Rule 63 and may appoint a person to present the allegations. If the protest committee decides that a support person who is a party to the hearing has broken a rule, it may issue a warning, exclude the person from the event or venue, or remove any privileges or benefits, or take other action within its jurisdiction as provided by the rules. In addition, if the protest committee decides a boat may have gained a competitive advantage as a result of the breach by the support person, or the support person committed a further breach after the protest committee warned a boat in writing following a previous hearing, that a penalty may be imposed. Then the protest committee may also penalize a boat that is a party to the hearing for the breach of a rule by a support person by changing the boat's score in a single race up to and including disqualification. So remember that under 62.4 that the protest committee would need to make the boat a party to the hearing before they can penalize them, because they need to present them with an opportunity to defend themselves and in a hearing. So bottom line is, if a support person breaks a rule, then the PC may penalize the support person and may decide to penalize that boat that the support person is supporting, and again adding that if that boat is made a party to the hearing. Now, reopening a hearing. A, the protest committee may reopen a hearing if it decides a party was unavoidably absent from the hearing and they had earlier decided to conduct the hearing without the other party present. 2, it may have made a significant error and wants to correct that error. Or 3, significant new evidence has become available within a reasonable time. However, a protest committee shall reopen a hearing when required to do so by the national authority under Rule 71.3 or ARF. So you may request, and a PC may reopen a hearing if party absence was unavoidable, PC made an error, significant new information becomes available. Also, to be valid, the request must be in writing. So a party to the hearing may request a reopening by delivering a written request to the race office or by other method as stated in the sailing instructions, no later than 24 hours after being informed of the decision. The request shall identify the reason for making it. However, on the last scheduled day of racing, the request shall be delivered within the protest time limit if the requesting party was informed of the decision on the previous day, no later than 30 minutes after the party was informed of the decision on that day. The request does not comply with this rule is invalid. So to summarize this, to be valid, the request must be in writing, delivered within 24 hours unless the last day, then 30 minutes after being informed, and it must identify the reason for a request. Now, U.S. Sailing prescribes A, that a boat that retires from a race or accepts a penalty does not by that action alone admit liability for monetary damages. A protest committee shall find facts and make decisions only in compliance with the rules. No protest committee or U.S. Sailing Appeal Authority shall adjudicate any claim for monetary damages. Such a claim is subject to the jurisdiction of the courts. The basic purpose of the rules is to prevent contact between boats. By participating in an event governed by the rules, a boat agrees that responsibility for monetary damages arising from any breach of the rules shall be based on fault as determined by application of the rules, and that she shall not be governed by the legal doctrine of assumption of risk for monetary damages resulting from contact with other boats. So while insurance companies want to see the hearing decision to assign blame and who should pay if there is a dispute, U.S. Sailing prescribes that a boat being penalized is not the same as assigning monetary responsibility for damage and injury. Now, U.S. prescriptions that change that we should be aware of. The old Rule 60.3, after Rule 60.3 it said add, U.S. Sailing prescribes that Rule 60.3b is changed to B, request redress for a boat or call a hearing to consider redress. Since this doesn't exist in the 2025-2028 prescriptions, now the PC doesn't request redress, they just consider it for a boat. So delete any references to 60.3 prescriptions in your documents since it no longer exists. The old rule was 63.1. New reference in terms of U.S. prescriptions is Preamble to Part 5, Section B. U.S. Sailing prescribes that A, the protest PC makeup, and then B, the redress protest committee makeup, and this is a rule that you can delete if you wish. Old rule number was 63.2. The new reference is 63.1b. Redress requested, any other boat may participate. The PC notifies all boats. PC considers redress for other boats meeting requirements. Again, if you used to delete the prescription to 63.2, now you'll delete the prescription to 63.1b. I just bring this up, same rule number 81. Indemnification or hold harmless agreements. The U.S. Sailing prescribes that you cannot do or request indemnification. If you are for some reason still doing that in your wording, then you definitely would want to consider deleting the prescription to 81. Now, what changed? Mostly the number references in the NOR and SI. There are other prescriptions that the rules changed or the numbers changed, and at some point I will do a separate video and talk about those. All right, so let's talk about misconduct. And this is not meant to be a clinic on how to conduct a misconduct hearing, but it's more for the sailors to understand what their obligations are under the rules. So first of all, 69, misconduct, obligation not to commit misconduct, and the resolution if a report is made. So A, competitor, boat owner, or support person shall not commit an act of misconduct. B, misconduct is one, conduct that is a breach of good manners, a breach of good sportsmanship, or unethical behavior, or two, conduct that may bring or has brought the sport in disrepute. C, an allegation of a breach of Rule 69.1a shall be resolved in accordance with the provisions of Rule 69. It shall not be grounds for a protest. And we covered this in week 1, but it's worth reminding you of examples of bad behavior on the next slide. So here are the examples out of sailing case 138. 1, engaging in any unlawful activity. 2, engaging in any activity which may bring the sport into disrepute. 3, bullying, discriminatory behavior, and intimidation. 4, physical or threatened violence. 5, acting recklessly or in a manner that does or is likely to cause damage or injury. 6, disobeying the reasonable instructions of event officials. 7, intentionally breaking a rule or inciting others to break a rule. 8, interference with other competitors' equipment. 9, repeated breaches of a rule. 10, failing to act to prevent your boat or team breaking a rule when you're aware of that breach. 11, not telling the truth or the whole truth in a hearing. 12, other forms of cheating such as falsifying personal, class, or measurement documents, entering a boat known not to measure, missing out a mark to gain places, etc. 13, foul or abusive language that causes or may cause offense. 14, making abusive or disrespectful comments concerning race officials or their decisions, including via electronic means such as social media. So there's a very broad range of activities that can be considered misconduct, and if reported to the protest committee, could result in a Rule 69 hearing, which we, as mentioned before, could be handled through a warning. It could be handled through disqualification in races, the entire regatta, or other more serious penalties. So bottom line is, be careful about your behavior, because misconduct is a very serious offense and can definitely damage your sailing career. So let's say you go through a protest committee hearing and you don't like the result of it. Well, Rule 70 says appeals and requests to a national authority, unless Rule 70.3 applies, which means a no appeal type of regatta. A party to a hearing has the right to appeal the protest committee's decision or its procedures, but not the facts found, to the national authority. In addition, a party may appeal when the protest committee has failed to hold a hearing or to make a decision. And there are cases where a protest committee refused to hold a hearing, and the only recourse was for somebody to file an appeal. The facts cannot be appealed, but the following can be appealed: the protest committee decision, or the protest committee fails to hold a hearing, the protest committee fails to make a decision, unless it's a no appeal jury, typically at national or higher events. You file an appeal with U.S. Sailing to have them look at the facts found and either agree with the decision or overturn the decision. In the U.S., it is a 2-level process, because what the U.S. has done is rewritten Appendix R, which is the appeals appendix, and turned it into a 2-level process where first you have a regional appeals committee. So the appeal is sent by U.S. Sailing to the regional appeals committee, and the regional appeals committee will review the decision, make their determination of whether to uphold the appeal or to dismiss the appeal. And if you still don't like the decision that the local appeals or regional appeals committee makes, then you can have the full U.S. Sailing National Appeals Committee look at their decision and the protest committee decision and render a final verdict. Now, just briefly, I want to talk about Appendix A and scoring. This is, again, not meant to be a clinic on how to do scoring, but rather just to point out a few pertinent facts. Appendix A1, number of races scheduled and number required to constitute a series shall be in the NOR or the SI. And Rule 90.3A is also applicable here. So if you don't see the number of races scheduled or the number required to constitute a series in the NOR or the SI, then you need to ask the organizing authority what are those numbers. A2, the series score is a total of her scores excluding her worst score, unless the NOR SI say something different, and that's part of the low point scoring system also. A3, score by start time, finish time, and handicap, or by the order of finish if one design. Seems pretty straightforward. A4, low point scoring unless NOR or SI say otherwise. A5, RC can determine scores without a hearing DNF, DNS, DNC, OCS, NSC. Of course, remember, NSC is not sailing the course. Z flag scoring penalties, UFD, BFD, non-compliance with a certificate if there was found that there were some issues before. Boats that retired can be given the RET score or took a 44.3A scoring penalty by filling out a scoring penalty acknowledgement form, or flying the yellow flag if the scoring penalty is in place. A6, DSQ, RET, or NSC, all other boats are moved up one place for each boat with those type of scores. Race ties, points added together and divided equally. A8, series ties list in the order best to worst. Where there is a difference, the tie is broken in favor of the boat with the best scores. If still tied, then ranked in order of their scores in the last race. A9, guidance on redress, and tells you some options that the protest committee should be telling the race committee to do in terms of scoring. Then A10 is the scoring abbreviations. See the racing rules of sailing for all of these different abbreviations, and so that you're aware what they mean. Remember, TLE is not in the racing rules of sailing. It's something that people invent if they would rather, instead of DNF after a finishing window, then they invent the TLE score. I'm not going to get into that debate because many people don't think that TLE is a good idea. Other people think it's a great idea. And then there's all kinds of ways that you can apply TLE scores if you want to. And again, TLE is the time limit expired after the finishing window. Then we said week 5 we were going to get into part 4, key points on other requirements while racing, and part 7, event organization. Just to be aware that while we did a week 6 in the local sessions, I'm going to just include how to become a race officer or a judge in the week 5, so there's only going to be one more session for you. Look forward to hearing your comments about this or any other session. Your comments are always welcome. Send any corrections and suggestions to my email. The document's not copyrighted, so you're more than welcome to do what you wish with them. Always as a reminder, these are my own personal views and not necessarily those of U.S. sailing or world sailing. Thank you for your time.